Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Neil and Pratik podcast, which we are very fortunate enough to have my wonderful wife on this call, Richa Sharma. Neil and I are very happy to take a different perspective to our podcast this time. Instead of only keeping ourselves restricted to market research, now we're expanding our overview to more audience, to more interest. And we are more focused on Richa's podcast, focusing on her move from India to Germany and how she has established herself. This will be the first time I, as a husband, will get to question my wife, which is a very fortunate thing in my life. So I'm very excited about this. So first of all, Richa, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Pratik. And thank you so much, Neil, for considering me for this podcast. It's lovely to be here, actually, and be on the other side, like Pratik says. Yeah, for a change, I get questioned. And publicly.
Good stuff.
So, yeah.
Good. I know. It's a great opportunity. That's why I kind of encourage this podcast. So moving on, now getting on with a little bit of a conversation together, keeping it more relaxed and easy. I'll let Neil start off with his questions, and then we'll carry this podcast on.
So when you first moved from India to Germany, what were some of the unspoken rules that you had to learn? Not just about business, but about belonging to the culture and society there.
Absolutely. Actually, it's a perfect question to kick off because when I came here, I wasn't doing any business. So I was having a perfect career, what I thought. I was having a great career back in India. And when I came here, I was not working. So I was from one day to the other, a stay-at-home mom. I enjoyed the stay-at-home mom bit, but everything changed. So when I came here, coming back to your question, it was the language. It is a very inherent part of the German culture because they believe in speaking in German, rightly so, why not? And that changed everything for me. So from one day to the other, I felt illiterate. I couldn't understand what people were talking. And I did try to learn a bit while I was in India, like on my own, just a very bit. And of course, when you live here in the country, they speak differently. They have little small expressions which the books don't teach you. The language was a big one. And another thing that really struck to me like a thunderbolt, I would say, was that when they asked you for an opinion or something, coming from India, we are always used to giving a very sugar-coated, beautiful opinion. It doesn't have to be true, but you try to make the other person happy. And in Germany, I learned that you can give your true opinion. It can be a bit harsh, but it's the true opinion. So you learn to be a bit more open, a bit more transparent. And that to me was the biggest learning. Yeah, there's so much more, but yeah, these two, they struck to me.
I'll get on with the second question. Following up on your openness, I never thought Richa was very polite or sugar-coated. She was always very open. For me, there was no change, but I do understand what she's mentioning about the openness. I completely agree with that. Now, I would ask you, Richa, as a business, like you said, you had a flourishing business out in India when you came here and things just changed. So how was it when you came over here, being from a flourishing businesswoman to coming down to proving yourself once again after when you kicked off your own business, after you started working around here? How was it for you being a woman of color? How difficult or how challenging was it for you to prove yourself once again?
It wasn't easy. It was definitely difficult. I would be lying to myself if I say, oh, it was very easy, I had this advantage. That's all not true. It was definitely not easy. And I had to prove myself twice. One, that yes, I can speak German because I eventually learned. I spent a lot of time learning the language, trying to understand how the country works and everything, different rules, the way they work in terms of the same industry, interior design, but here it was being done a bit differently. And the priorities were different. So it was difficult. I gradually accepted my background and embraced it. And that over a period of time became my icebreaker. So my background, which was in the beginning hesitant, it was restricting me to come out and talk about it. I used it as my strength. And rightly so, because I am Indian and it will always be that. But having lived in this country for now 20 years, I have kind of figured out the best of both. So, yeah.
I had this kind of similar experience when I moved to Germany. It's obviously, the language is there, and I tried the best I could, but the articles were a bane of my life for some time. But then Aside from the language, I remember I was working with kitchens, and the entire culture around kitchens was so different from the UK. I had to learn all about what the kitchen means in a German home and how it's managed and how it's organised, how different it is really from your own culture. But then I think you're right. When I was working in research for kitchens, I was able to bring a different perspective. And I was also able to explain the German perspective to non-Germans better because I was also learning it. So I was learning what they were thinking, and I was able to others who were learning how they were thinking better.
You're very right. As a third person, you kind of see what they do, which something they're doing very, very normally, something that they're used to doing. But you, coming from outside, kind of observe it better, and you can pinpoint it and use it as a tool. That's your winning card then.
Yeah.
So very true.
Exactly. Specifically was like, there's this famous one about bringing a second-hand kitchen to your new house or bringing your kitchen to your new house, which surprised me. But also some similar things like for some cultures, it surprised them how they use the kitchen generally. In the evenings, it's usually a light meal and not really advanced cooking techniques. But they have a beautiful kitchen, and that confused some people from outside of Germany just with why have such a beautiful kitchen when you're not going to use it properly every evening was kind of their thinking.
It is a very, very functional, at least from my industry perspective, it's a very functional industry. Everything has to have a purpose, and then it may be beautiful, but the functionality has to be on point. That cannot be compromised. So that is very true. Yeah.
And you moving on to the next question is you work with brands from many countries, I think, like US, Italy, Sweden, Western Europe, France, UK, Germany. And how has your multicultural background actually become a superpower or competitive advantage?
It is actually my biggest asset. So different backgrounds helps me understand how people can or might think differently. And that really comes to, it is like an icebreaker for me. So when I enter a place, I normally start with my background. So there is no awkward silence. I always start because the question is in their mind that she says she's German, but doesn't look it, So I try to answer it for them and instantly make them feel comfortable that, I understand your perspective and I understand what you mean. And if you think that, I might not know about the German market, I try to get into their shoes. And because, of course, I've been living here for 20 years, that is my advantage. And I try to get into their shoes and try to, see that how they might want it. And over a period of time, frankly, I think I've become that person. So I might just say I love color because I'm from India, but I am also becoming more and more black and white and grays. And I also think that, you get something black and white and gray and that's timeless. That's the German thought process that has gotten into my head. So yes, I would say that my cultural background is my winning card at the moment, and I do not hesitate from using it.
And on that point, just kind of stressing on it, I mean, because you've been there for so long, or you've been living here for 20 years now, or rather here, we have been living here for 20 years. The question also goes to the point, a lot of people in your industry get signals locally from the different markets that you deal with. You get locally those signals, but a lot of people tend to miss those signals. Even being locals, they tend to miss those signals. How do you think you perceive those signals, or what do you think is your advantage of getting those signals now after 20 years being here, that you understand, okay, this is what the client meant by saying this?
A very good learning. I would say this is something that struck to me right in the beginning, that their feedback was absolutely honest. And till date, a German or an Austrian client, because that's the area that I work with, they have a very clear and precise feedback. If you miss noticing it or accepting it, that's an absolute recipe for a failure. The minute I get a very clear and precise feedback, it can be yes and a no. There is very rarely a gray zone. So when they give you a feedback, then I quickly align to it. I do not waste any time in trying to tell the client, no, you can do this and you can do that, even if it's to my advantage. There's one thing I really learned here, that it doesn't matter where you make more money, you still suggest to your client what works the best for them. And so coming back to your question about a very clear and precise feedback helps me to align what I can deliver to my clients, and that is something I cannot miss out on. And there are very often times it happens that they tell me that, can you please get back to me in 3 months, or, let's say like 6 weeks or something like that. And I note it down and I get back to them. And the Indian in me thinks that they must have forgotten, or, they just were very polite and they told me to do that, but they're actually not interested. I do note it down and I get back to them. And funnily enough, they'd noted it down too. And they're ready with proper answers and they're ready with everything that they promised. So that is something that I learned, and I actually follow it because that's like a winning tool for me.
Yeah, talking about subtle, when I was working with the kitchens, I was actually working with a Japanese client as well as Germans locally, and they have very different, sometimes there's some similarities in such as a focus or attention to detail or drive, but signals from Japanese, they can be easily misread, especially from outside the native culture. Even if you're speaking a language, the subtle signals can easily be missed. And it's also the opposite of direct feedback. So often it was a case of we will go away, we will study it, we will study it, and nobody really knew if they would or what that really meant. But you're right, with it, when I was working with the German side, they kind of made their feelings clear enough, and we weren't relying on the subtle clues on subtle signals.
Sometimes you're totally taken aback and shocked as to what happened here. They didn't have to be so direct, but then with time, nothing shocks. There is nothing about personal. I sell something and they have to sell it further, so they ought to know what they want to sell, and it's nice. But yes, there are moments, let's say 1 in 20 times, I still manage to get a bit surprised and shocked.
Yeah, well, I wonder sometimes my Japanese colleagues actually liked discussing about the signals and actually enjoyed it, and it kind of brought them together, and they kind of missed that when working with the Germans, I think. So it was definitely a difference there. Along with planning was a different approach as well, because from my experience, when the project started, the Germans wanted to come together, make a good plan and stick to it, because that was a good plan that they made. Whereas the Japanese side would often take a different approach, where the plan would always be tweaked and always improved, because that was always possible too. And so that sometimes those different approaches in planning was obvious, but I hadn't thought about the subtle signals. That's also a very big difference.
Actually, also the European and the Asian differences. So I do catch up on, the Asians or the Indian background tells me that if you have to deliver a harsh message, you have to kind of make it a bit sweet, make the blow a bit sweet. And by doing so, you end up miscommunicating or giving the other person a hope which actually doesn't exist. So that is something which was a huge learning for me. It does hit you hard sometimes. You feel disappointed and you always wish they could have said it differently, They didn't have to be so rude. But again, coming back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, that they're not trying to be rude. They're trying to be transparent. They're trying to be very clear in their communication. So it's the same, whether it's in writing or the facial expressions or in spoken, it's the same.